Welcome everybody, and especially welcome to anyone who's joining for the first time. This is the latest Q community update. Hopefully you can see the slides changing now. So just a brief run through the agenda. As ever, we start with release updates on where we are with the latest version of Q, and then blend into talking about the evaluator and performance improvements as a sort of current top topic. And we'll then touch on a topic we talked about last time, which is deployment patterns and defaults. Talking about Q Command v2, where we had a recent office hours as a part of a focus on that. Encodings and the different languages effectively that Q can speak and understand. Modules in the central registry and making Q more reusable and shareable. QLSP, where we are with that. Exciting demo following in that space. Talking about docs and content, and then just briefly touching on sort of any other community points. Daniel, straight over to you for release updates.
So we've been busy with releases. We did release 0.14.0 about a month ago. There's quite a lot of significant performance improvement in the evaluator there. You can go and see the release notes for updates, and Marcel will talk more about that as well. There were 3 language changes, most prominently the error built-in, which again, Marcel will describe in a second. We've also sunset 2 experiments, which were introduced many months ago, the embed experiment and the toposort for topological sorting of fields. We're not aware of any regressions remaining with either of those, but that the process is done in terms of you can no longer disable those experiments. They're always on. And we also have a new command to import Kubernetes custom resource definitions, or CRDs. So think like importing JSON schema, it's kind of similar. And we also did a bug fix release for 0.14, and we've already done the first alpha for 0.15. The main change in that alpha is the introduction of the LSP, which again, Matthew will talk about. And we will do the second alpha very soon, probably in the coming week or so. So please test these alpha releases if you can, and report any bugs or any issues that you spot as early as you can. And I would repeat myself like a broken record, but if anybody is stuck on an old Q version for whatever reason, be it performance, be it breakages, regressions, or even if you're using the Go API in a funky way and that also broke, please let me know, because that's something that we want to be on top of.
Yes, so yes, that's me now. Yes, the controls work. That's always great. Yeah, the biggest change by far from the evaluator point of view, I guess, well, depends on who's using it, is that eval v2 is now removed. So that by itself gives a few percent performance improvement because of the, like the structures now have become smaller basically across the board. It's a lot of shared structures. So the reason why we removed it is because eval v3 basically has far less bugs than eval v2 at this moment. Even though it can still be that eval v3 has a bug where eval v2 is not, but there's very little of that known on our side. And performance is mostly in line. I say mostly. So a lot of people see very big improvements, but not everybody, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So then what I'm also going to talk about is experiments. We have a few experiments that were introduced in v14 that are now accepted, or permanent, if you will. We have some new experiments coming up, and I'll explain a little bit. We now have file-based experiments. I'll explain a little bit what that is about. That's what these new commands are all about.
Just briefly, Marcel, when you say that eval v2 is removed, just to highlight, that's not in a released version as yet, as in it's in a pre-release version for anyone who is, it's in the alpha for 15.
Yes, we're talking,
Yep.
yes, alpha
Yep.
15, yes,
Yep.
v15. Right, so performance. So most projects that we see in Unity have seen a big improvement. There is 1 or 2 projects that we know of that do not have an improvement, but maybe like a bit of a slowdown even. So we've identified the remaining performance issues regarding to that. So this is mostly because, so one thing that eval v3 does is that it processes all optional fields. So it just considers all of it. So it does actually a lot of extra work. And in a case when you're like unifying disjunctions and stuff like that, it really shouldn't. It should notice that two fields, when two fields are unified that are the same, it shouldn't do any work there. But right now it does. So it's actually to some extent encouraging that it's only like a little bit slower for doing so much more work than evolv2. Then another problem is that we actually know already for a very long time is chaining. So some of the problems are related to chaining, which is that if you have one references that reference a field that references another one, that's very long chain, that can cause a bit of a slowdown. So both of these can be fixed with fine-grained structure sharing. There's already an implementation, like a poor man's version of that should fix the first issue. We're going to do some experiments with that soon, but that's not in yet. But as I said, it's not like a huge slowdown for the projects that we know, or at least where this affects it. So for now we are okay with removing, we're okay with removing evolv2. So some other performance work that we're looking at and considering. I mean, there's more things to do, but that are really on our radar right now is discriminator fields. So you can imagine it if you have a lot of disjunctions, we have to compute all the disjuncts. But if we know, for example, you're unifying a struct with some fixed constant field, which only occurs in one of the disjuncts, you really only have to compute that one, and you can drop the other ones immediately. So there's some machinery we want to put in place there, which would also give quite a big performance boost. So then we introduced the error built-in last time. So there were some problems with that. It's actually quite hard to service the user-defined error in a the way you would want it to do, or the way you would think you should do it. So what we're doing right now instead, we fixed those bugs, but what we're doing is if one field has multiple user errors, then we basically service all of them, and we include the positions where the error occurs. So you have to then induce yourself, okay, this is the error that actually failed, but we basically show all error conditions that apply to that field. And basically it's very expensive, so it will really slow down evaluation if we want to be very precise, which, I mean, I haven't seen a efficient way of doing it, and it doesn't seem worth it for now. But for now, basically, it reports all of them. Some people even prefer that, so it's not necessarily that this is even the worst thing to do. So I've also been experimenting with evolv4 a bit, which is a different evaluation technique, which theoretically should result in much less work again. So basically, within a few days part-time work, I got 70% of the tests to pass, more or less. So this is much faster than the evolv3 work. So I've identified a few things where this doesn't fit and it requires a little bit of more work. But overall, it seems like a much simpler evaluator. So for the most part, when we run into problems with evolv4, the solution was like, okay, look at the evolv3 code, whatever it did there, and then don't do that. So basically just delete effectively whole swaths of code, and all of a sudden it starts working, right? So it's a much simpler implementation. So, but it's not super high priority at the moment, or not at all high priority, but it was interesting to look at it. So there's a few bugs remaining in evolv3, so one in the API, and they all seem related to the new comprehension semantics of evolv3. So these new semantics are a big problem in evolv4, and we actually have found a way around it to not use that. It's not so much semantics, it's more like implementation of it, really. And we so we have a much simpler solution for evolv4, which is actually much more robust also. So we're thinking of backporting that from evolv4 into evolv3 to solve these problems. So in that sense, evolv4 is already quite useful. So accepted experiments. So keep validators was on by default already from the get-go. Nobody has reported any issue with it. It seems very non-controversial, but basically, if you had two constraints greater than equal than 1 or less or equal to than 1, then it used to simplify this to 1, and right now it doesn't do that anymore. which is rather important for certain other features to do in the future. So another experiment that was not on by default, or no, was not, yeah, that we have now enabled, is that you can now compare any two values. So it's not an error anymore to compare an int with a string, for example. We'll just return false. And we now also have then a unary comparator, which is useful if you want to say this value has to be exactly this concrete struct and no instance of it or whatever. So this is quite useful in some cases. And this is a prerequisite also for associative lists. So all this work has been sort of prep work for enabling associative lists. Yes, Steve?
I'm just curious, Marcel. I know you noted concrete structs there. What does it do if the struct is not concrete?
The same thing as it would do with any comparison. Then basically it would say this is an incomplete error.
Okay.
Yeah. So then new experiments. So this is a really big one. This is a major language change, I would say. So right now, if you have a definition, so you want to add fields to it, so which is very common, for example, for Kubernetes structures, if you have a meta thing or shared fields, you basically embed it, which disables closeness. So this was very confusing to people. It's also very hard to implement, especially if you embed a closed struct, the struct itself will be closed again. So that's a very expensive thing to implement. It's also very confusing, non-local and all that stuff. So what we're saying now is whenever you embed a definition or whenever you use a definition, it's closed, period. And if you embed it, then the enclosing struct will be that definition. If you don't want that, you can use refer to the definition post-fixing it with ... saying, I don't want to consider the closeness of this definition. I just want to use it, right? So this opens up various things, no pun intended. So some people actually wanted to say, okay, I want this field to be this definition, but I want users to be able to extend fields to it. So that's now possible. Also, if you embed a schema at the top level, for example, that whole file is now, and the whole schema is enforced for that entire file, which is something that we wanted for JSON schema, never found a good solution. This solves that. So this also, if you look at the closeness algorithm, this is greatly simplifies things. It really is a lot faster. Also people, so comprehensions, for example, were embeddings, right? So when people say I have a comprehension and then I yield a schema, closeness is not enforced. So now you have control over that, right? So it's all much more syntactical and straightforward in that sense.
Sorry, Marcel, just
Yes.
to briefly catch you on one thing there. You said if you embed it at the top level of a file, the file will be constrained.
No, the package. The
Okay,
package. Yeah.
excellent. Yep.
Yeah. So at that level. So this is quite useful, quite nice. As
Extremely
I said,
powerful at the package level. Yep.
it's extremely powerful at the package level. It solves many problems that people had with Q, and it simplifies things tremendously. So embeddings are no longer special. I mean, they influence printing order of fields. That's it. So one thing to note, there is one subtle semantic difference, is that if you embedded a definition, whether you embedded it in a field that was a definition or not, that would become closed afterwards. So it would first open it up, then close it. So that's gone now. So we do have a Q fix for this. So you can run qfix on your files if your module is not the right. So your module has to be at v15, language version v15, v0.15. So once it's at that version, you can apply the fix, and it will rewrite your queue to have the same semantics. So if you see any issues with that, let us know, right? But it should rewrite it, introducing this close all built-in, if it's necessary, not if it's not necessary, right? So it does some analysis and then inserts it. So it should be able to convert it in a backwards incompatible way. So as I will explain later, we have now a very strict and regimented experiment status that we encode. So this is now per file. So what you can see in the example on the right is that you have to explicitly mark a file as adopting that experiment. So within your module, you can have different files that either are adopting the experiment or not. This has to come before anything else, so before the package clause. And you can also import modules that are not using this experiment, right? So the reason we have this per file experiment thing now is that if you're depending on modules, like you don't have to all move to this new experiment at the same time, right? So you can do it, and even within a module, you can do it incrementally. So at some point, it's actually already implemented, but at some point we have this qmod upgrade. So if you move to, let's say we accept explicit open for v16, and you upgrade it, you want to upgrade your model to v16, it will basically look, are there any files that don't have the explicit open experiment enabled, right? So that are in the old semantics, it will automatically apply the fixes to these files. So you don't have to really, know about these experiments per se, but the qmod upgrade will update the language version of your module and then move all the files that need to be moved to the new semantics automatically. Yes. So another experiment, which is part of the alias proposal that's now implemented. I'm thinking even if we can make it in time to include the alias proposal as well, but probably not. So at least self is now available as an alternative to value aliases. So I get back to the alias proposal in a bit. But this is how it would look like. So it's basically the enclosing struct or list is what it would refer to. So as a reminder, if you have x:, b:, that's a shorthand for x:, curly brace. So the enclosing struct is x. So it refer to x. So self.c here is 2. Similarly, you can use it within lists. The list is the enclosing struct. Yes, fun fact, the implementation was essentially one line of code. It was pretty wild. It was very easy to implement this. Yep. Next slide. So this is how the per files experiment works. So we basically have, so this is really designed for us to allow us to introduce backwards incompatible changes, like the hash a ... as a backwards incompatible change, and to allow gradual migration. So because it's so flexible where you introduce it, we will, when we introduce an experiment, it will be off. And then when it's accepted, it will be on. There is no, so you can only selectively turn it on. You will not be able to selectively turn it off. So once you move a whole module to a version that accepts a certain experiment, you have to move to that experiment. And this is basically done because we have sort of a chain of dependencies in some of these things. So this allows us really to not lose our sanity and sort of like trying to make everything work together, right? So basically we have 3 states: preview, stable, and withdrawn. So preview introduces the experiment. It's off by default. You can turn it on with the experiment attribute. There's no way to do this with any kind of environment variable, right? Because it's per file. So that when it's stable, it's turned on. When it's withdrawn, we say like, okay, oops, bad experiment. We are not going to do this, right? Like we hope we'll really try to avoid withdrawn, but you never know. So the global experiments also have a default, just as a contrast. So the global experiments work differently. So there you basically, it's off first, and at some point it becomes a default. You can then still turn it on until it's stable, right? Then you cannot turn it off anymore. You can still turn it on and off until it's stable. But yeah, here it's more regimented, more strict. So you can view both the per file and global experiments with qhelp experiments. This is automatically generated. So as experiments get added, the documentation is updated. So we have qfix-exp. Oh, I see there, that's not explicit, it's explicit open. So you can upgrade certain experiments. So this only applies to experiments, of course, that are backwards incompatible and that require a fix. So that's only explicit open at the moment. And then ultimately we'll have QMod upgrade. Yeah,
Just
Paul?
briefly, Marcel, there's a number of good examples here on these slides, just to say that we will be publishing on qlang.org examples of each of these experiments as well, which will give you sort of ready to roll, copy paste things that you can just take locally and play around with rather than having to extract them from the slides. So as we've done with previous pre-releases where there's something, as we are now sort of advertising it early in the community update, we will publish examples on qlang.org that depend on the pre-release version that will allow you to just get up and running with them. And they will, by necessity, have to show you how to use the @experiment attribute as well. So rather than trying to sort of memorize all of this, you'll be able to get up and running from examples from qlang.org as of the beginning of next week.
Yep. So then some upcoming experiments. So in the proposal discussion, GitHub discussion proposal category, there is an alias proposal and a try proposal right now. So the alias proposal really serves two main purposes. One of it is to just simplify aliases. Aliases are way too complicated in Q. There's 7 different types of aliases, may not look like it, but there are. They all work slightly differently. There's like 3 syntactic positions officially. So now we basically replace this with 1 syntactic position and 1 interpretation, really, for all these aliases. I mean, arguably you could say it's multiple interpretations, but it's much simpler right now. So on the right-hand side, you see some examples of that. So the alias now moves to the end with a tilde. That's the only position there is. And then you can say, you can bind both the key and the value, right? And this works the same for dynamic fields, for pattern constraints, for everything, right? There's no more value aliases. So the value aliases basically you would now have to do with self. So those are really the 2 constructs, which is, closer to other languages. There is actually one, so there actually, I say there's one more reason to do the tilde alias. There's actually 2 more. So one of it is that the equal sign just means something very different in Q than it is in many other languages, and it looks really weird. You get really weird looking Q. So basically, it's to avoid this confusion. We say we're just not using equals for aliases anymore. That also allows us to use equals for defaults in the future, which is something Paul will come back on to later in this presentation. So the other reason is that if you look at the query syntax for Q, the old aliases really didn't jive with that at all. So that meant, so a lot of the query constructions were really awkward. And with the tilde syntax, it actually does work nicely with queries, and we can do nice expressions with that. So let's look at Tom. Does the change show that the field identifiers will always be aliased as strings? I'm not sure if I know what that means.
Oh, just to clarify, like if you have like foo and then it's a value of 2, then we can alias the string foo, not just the value 2.
Yes, you should be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As in, like I just showed in the chat, Tom, is that how you were looking to spell it, or?
No, I think he means yes. Let me write it down.
I think that second example there, you've got the K, because you've got the brackets K, comma, underscores, then K is capturing the name of the field, right?
Yeah.
And the underscore is capturing the value but discarding it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a logical consequence. I had never thought of that, but it would be a logical consequence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So then the try proposal, the try proposal is seems a bit gratuitous. There's other ways to do it, especially once we have the exist built in, but it does solve a few problems. I have a bunch of Q code that I tried where I tried, okay, that's too much try, where I used it, and it really makes things much nicer. And it's, as I said, it seems to be introducing maybe a bit too much syntax, but a lot of this syntax is actually part of the query proposal. So it's not like this syntax won't be used for other things either. So then it's basically another comprehension type, right? With other syntax that's used also for and other things. So it's not that bad. And I do think, so if you want to try, if you want to use exist to emulate try, there's a lot of food guns and there's a lot of things which makes it very complicated. So I think it's useful. But we're going to do a very simple version of try, not a full proposal at first. Yeah, so as a reminder again, like please, if you can, use Unity. We've caught a lot of bugs beforehand, right? Like made sure that a lot of people could transition smoothly to eval v3 without them even knowing it, right? So we really use Unity to check compatibility of the new evaluators. So both for performance and for compatibility. And with, eval v2 removing, it's a big thing. And also with the language changes coming up, right? This really helps us catching bugs early.
Steve asked a question there, Marcel, or just sort of made a point about me trying to prove that try is not necessary. I think I try to ask the awkward questions, as it were, Steve, in that respect, and just sort of play not necessarily devil's advocate, but just trying to sort of look at things. And that's what I think in anything, and it's just sort of citing the recent office hours where you sort of said, well, hang on a second, why are we doing this? And I think that's really important. So just to encourage that, if others feel like, hang on a second, Tom, you sort of asked a specific question there. Your usage report on the error built in, for example, was super good. So the more that people can, sorry, I'm going to use it, try this stuff out, the better, because it really does help us to battle test it before it even gets to perhaps experiment stage or whatever, right? So please, this kind of brainstorming, do just do it in the open. And Joe Tabor, for example, on the Q command v2 stuff is just sort of doing a number of separate thought experiments and areas. It's hugely appreciated. So please do keep that kind of feedback coming.
Yeah, one note, so there will also be a different pace of including or sort of accepting the proposal. So try maybe, not a very urgent thing, and we probably need a lot of examples to figure out, is it really shorten things or not? So aliases is sort of on a critical path for other language features. Certain language features like improved defaults are not possible without the aliases, right? So this is, or not possible is maybe a strong word, but very awkward without the aliases. So this is something we might want to, move along a bit faster. So we can have definitely different time spans for different experiments, and especially if something is a bit maybe controversial, like try, right? I think for try, it might make sense that we don't accept it until we have much more of the query language rolled out, right? For example, so that you can see how it interacts with other things.
Great. Thanks, Marcel. Huge amount covered there. And we'll share the slides at the end. As I said, we'll get those examples up on qlang.org as soon as possible. One thing we touched on last time, and this builds on the defaults piece, which, as Marcel just described, is related to the aliases work that we're doing, is this concept of deployment patterns and defaults. Just before the beginning of the summer, I engaged with a number of folks on this topic in order to try and elicit use cases, scenarios that people are working with on a daily basis right now. So the current landscape, as we said at the time, is one of multiple environments, coordination between different teams, policy enforcement, etc. Right? As in, we work with quite a messy structure, and in particular, where there are multiple teams involved as well. This concept of, well, what is the default for something, is perhaps specific to a particular environment or specific app, and so it's a very sort of messy at times landscape to actually describe. And when there are tools like Helm that allow things like overrides, we need to sort of understand how defaults in Q can best fit the requirements and usages and problems that people are facing today. And so this is why we sort of kicked off this work. We're still involved in this work, heavily involved in this work, as a part of what we're thinking should happen with defaults, or could happen with defaults, as I suggest. So it's not like this has gone away. We're still very keen to understand what's working well with defaults today in Q, what's not working well, and separate entirely from people even using Q is how are people managing things like defaults, overrides, layers in tool X, whatever it might be? What's working well there? What's not working well? For example, it could be, and David Flanagan recently published something called QEnv, where he has environments that are sort of on a per directory basis. Think like DIRENV, where you have overrides within a directory. How should that kind of thing work? These are real practical examples of where having defaults and overrides in some way really is sort of a critical question. So please do continue to sort of ping us with challenges. We've had a number of calls since with folks who have shared problems with us that a lot of words that we hear are, well, we have layers of defaults, we have layers of environments here. This is something we're sort of really trying to fully understand a bit better and understand what language changes are actually potentially necessary. So please ping us in via any of these channels here, especially if you want to have a call, just get in touch, contact@q.dev there. Just in terms of next steps, we want to much better understand the use cases, user stories, and then, as Marcel suggested, better understand what language changes might be required in order to facilitate this kind of thing. Hence why we've now sort of gone all in on language changes, experiments, etc., to support this kind of exploration in a way that allows, with the QFix stuff, allows people to transition between these things in a simple way. That's it on the deployments pattern side of things, but in a similar vein, Q command v2. For many folks who are on this call, they're familiar with what we did. We had an office hour session last week where we're sort of exploring how Q command, which is where Q really clicks for a number of people, where that needs to go next. And just briefly, Q command is this concept of allowing people to build declarative workflows. And that sort of allows you to glue together different commands or network calls or whatever it might be with a clear declarative specification of what the connection is between the data and logic of that workflow. For some time now, we've been gathering feedback, etc., and bugs in issue 1325. And this sort of culminated in a couple of weeks ago, pulling together a first cut of the analysis of that feedback in 4081. And the office hours we held last week were a first sort of glance at that analysis and getting some feedback from folks. A huge thank you to everybody who joined that, because that really helped to actually shape what we're talking about when it comes to Q command v2, in particular what it is and what it isn't. We will be doing a second cut of that analysis to sort of shape this up a tiny bit more. But just sort of briefly at a high level now, Q command v2 is not an implementation of something like Bazel, GNU Make, or GitHub Actions, i.e. things like prior art in that space. There's a sort of, it's a layer that would enable such a thing to be built, but it is not those things itself, if that sort of separation is clear. And instead, as I say here, Q command v2 will most likely be a foundational block that enables that kind of thing. And current thinking, as we sort of suggested in the office hours, is that that will be made possible via user-defined functions, which may have side effects. And that is essentially the notion then of what a task is today is a user-defined function call that actually does something in some way, shape, or form, with all the necessary glue that will allow for job control, etc., that tying that all together. We talked briefly about the sequencing of what's going to happen with the Q command v2. Ultimately, we've got to get to a point where we sort of fully understand, well, does it make sense what we're trying to do with Q command v2 here? So this analysis and any sort of sketch designs and experimental implementation will be fully geared towards testing that hypothesis of what stands up. And that includes, well, what will people use on top of it? Please just join us in 4081 if you want to. There's already been a huge amount of engagement. Thanks again to everyone who's done that. I will do a second cut of the analysis just to sort of refresh on a couple of points, add in some points we missed, etc., in the coming week. Encodings, I think I can now hand over to Rog.
Yeah, so I've been recently working on a translation of Q to JSON schema. Of course, we have JSON schema to Q translation already, so this is the other way around. JSON schema, as we know, is very important in lots of ecosystems, very widely used, and particularly in AI at the moment. You know, some AI APIs include JSON schema as a first-class citizen, and that's definitely not going to go away. So I think interoperability between Q and JSON schema, particularly if you can use Q as the source of truth for the JSON schemas that you then pass to other APIs, such as MCP or AI APIs, it's going to be super useful. So that's a priority for us. So yeah, as I say, I've been working on that. The plan is to make it generate a bunch of variants, probably not all variants of JSON schema, because there are like 6 different versions, and so we might do. So some of the earlier ones are important because they're used in OpenAPI and used by Kubernetes, etc. But other earlier variants probably we wouldn't target. Probably a later variant and some earlier variants, including we want to support producing structural schemas such as created with CRD, used by CRDs, and then you'd have translation of CRD to Q and Q to CRD as well, which is also and also as part of that roadmap, we want to improve the support for generating OpenAPI and that whole space. So there's a lot on the horizon there, and so yeah, so this is a new command that supports getting translation of CRDs to Q directly. So this is the kind of equivalent of JSON schema to Q, except it works on CRDs. It actually produces a package. This is why it's called QGet, because unlike the other Q import commands, which produce a single file, this actually produces a set of packages, one for each version specified that we can find in those CRD files, and extracts all the things, all the documents in the same group. And you can, as demonstrated, you could just do that with a curl command as well, which is pretty nice. And that's what's going on under the hood in the central registry curated modules as well. That's leverage is taps into the same underlying functionality. Yes, Paul.
Just a call out to thank the folks working on Timoni for the early work that they've done in this space here, because they were really pushing the whole, including of CRD support. And indeed, there was a lot of engagement on how that should actually work from those folks in the Timoni community, but also the Q community as well. So thank you for those who helped sort of understand this space and understand how to best map that space to the Q space, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, that was definitely prior art that we looked at when implementing this, and we might have ended up in a slightly different space shape-wise, but I think that's very, very useful to have. What's this? Oh yeah, this is an example of some documentation that we have on some of the CRDs in the central registry. So we've got a bunch of documentation in q.dev. It is q.dev, isn't it?
Yeah, the curated modules. Yeah, q.dev is where the curated CRDs are sitting now.
So there's a bunch of documentation in there. It's not easy to find that. We plan on fixing that soon. I can never find it. And I will continue on. So talk about work on modules and the central registry. Very brief reminder. I'm sure everyone knows here about the Q central registry. And what it does. So that's a very brief reminder, which is in beta. We are going to move it to registry.q.dev, but keep the old domain name because everything's moving to q.dev. That has not happened yet, and we're working to improve automatically generated documentation, searching, and we have various handwritten documentation, as I've mentioned. Q.dev will mention various sort of how-tos and about the curated modules. So please check that out. So here's an example. We've added a bunch of new CRDs in the central registry under q.dev/x. I've listed a few of them there. And so there's an example link to the. That's a good point. Soon. We can do that. I might even have done that now.
Roger's talking about a question that David has asked in the chat for anyone who's just slightly lost.
Do we have a
what he's talking
timeline on a
about.
possible rename of the Argo C module to? I can't. That's not in my head right now. But we certainly plan to do that, even if we haven't done it already. So we've got Argo events and Argo CD. So that maybe I can't remember. I'll
take a note for us to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the prompt, David.
So yeah, as you can see, we've got example package docs automatically generated. We've got a guide. There's discussion of curated modules, but more importantly, we've got a new repository, which is not where the code lives, but where you can feedback with issues around the curated modules, whether they work for you, whether they don't, any improvements. Some other updates that we've submitted. If your GitHub module or your GitHub repository was private and you published something to the central registry, and actually that was a mistake and you wanted it to be public, we can now do that as an ad hoc, sort of one-off type thing. In general, we don't like people to change from private to public. And we definitely don't support the other way around. But if you'd like, if that's an issue for you and you want to do that, we can now support that. And in the documentation, we almost can view the actual source code queue behind the docs, which is super useful because there's not. The docs don't say everything about the source, and there's definitely work to be done about really good visualization of the source. Of the documentation, and sometimes just seeing the source is all you need. So that's going to be really useful. I'm certainly going to find that very useful. And as far as the central registry, so that we're going to add more docs. Improved rendering is always going to happen. Better. So I'm sure we've had the slide already, or some of it.
Apologies. Yeah, we have.
But if you want a schema, then please. We've got a template for creating an issue in the registry repo to ask for new content, which asks all the relevant questions, which we'll have to ask ourselves when adding things. So that should make it easier, streamline the process. And any other issues with the central registry, please go to that repository and add an issue. That's it.
Thanks, Rog. Matthew on QLSP.
Cool, thank you. So yes, for the last few community updates, I've been saying things like, well, I'm working very hard building foundations for the LSP and sorting out some underlying plumbing. But for the first time, we've actually got some features supported which are probably useful. And so these are available to you if you're running either off the tip of master or from the 0.15 alpha 1 and onwards. Yep, there are implemented features are jump to definition. There are sort of two ways of using that. I'll do a demo in just a minute. Hover docs should work. Completions should work, though possibly not in every scenario just yet. And also formatting, so you can do formatting on save if you want to do that. Again, there are some slight limitations on that, which I'll mention in just a minute. We've put together a getting started guide on our wiki. It covers some editors, not all editors. As usual with LSP, the key thing to configure is what is the command that you need to run in order to start up the LSP. And so for some editors, such as VS Code, which Paul will talk about in a minute, there is a specific extension that will do all of that for you. And for a lot of other editors, you just need to do a little bit of configuration. There are a number of limitations at the moment, which I'm working on overcoming. The most important one is that currently the LSP will only work for Q files that exist with a package declaration and are within a module. There are some known rough edges around what happens if you start with a bare file and type in the package declaration, or what happens if you delete a file which has previously been open in an editor with LSP enabled. For those of you who have been using this already. Thank you very much for all of the bug reports. Please do keep them coming. Yeah, things will continue to improve. So hopefully I'm going to do a demo. I've been on holiday for the last week, so I've largely forgotten everything, and I'm about to use VS Code, which I've never used before today. So this should go well. So first of all, jump to definition. So we can move to a declaration and we can jump to definition, and that works quite nicely. Any part within a path you can jump to definition, so we don't have to just go from the root, the A, we can go directly to the B as well. Now, in Q, as we all know, we can have lots of definitions of the same field. And so the LSP protocol actually allows us to return multiple locations. So now if I jump to definition, VS Code will show us that we've got both locations available. And this will work whether all the definitions are within the same file or across different files or even across different packages. So then we've also got hover docs working. So I can just hover over this A. And I can also hover over the B. And that is using exactly the same code, so as jump to definition. So anything that you can jump to definition to, you can have docs on them, and it will show up. And you can see that what I'm doing here is I'm separating them slightly because of the difficulty that if you're just taking all of the docs across several different definitions of a field and smushing them all together, it might not make a lot of sense. So I'm just adding essentially a little footer to each of them, which should give you some context as to, you know, does this paragraph really follow on, or is it from a separate declaration? As I mentioned, there are multiple modes or two modes really for jump to definition. So I've been demonstrating jumping to definition from a use of that field. So we're using A or we're using B here. But you can also actually go from the field declaration itself. So I can jump to definition from this field and it will show me the other declarations of this field. So if you're not necessarily using a field, but you want to ask, where are the other definitions of this field that I'm being unified with, then that will work, and it's the same LSP function, jump to definition. Yes. Right. So jump to definition also works for imports. So here, this is an import of a separate package within the same module. And so just like within Go, I can jump to definition and that will take me to the files that implement that package. Now, in this particular case, there's only one file that implements this package, which is why it's gone straight there. If there were multiple files that implement this package, then it would, you know, just as we've seen before, it would show you all those files, and you'd be able to choose which one to go to. Formatting, as I mentioned, is implemented. So as you can see, this file is badly formatted with one key press, as you'd expect. It gets formatted correctly. So that's jump to definition and also the hover docs. We also support completions. So there are two things that can be completed when you're typing in. So we can see that I could be in this particular location, I could be completing a value or a field name. So I could just be, you know, for example, referring to balloons here, which is defined down at the bottom, or I could be extending the field, adding something else that needs to be unified in here. And so you do get these two different categorizations of completions here. The symbol is VS Code's. Different editors will display different things there, but there are these two different categories. And yes, this also works with imports. So the package that we've implemented, as soon as you add the dot, it will be able to go into it, and so now I can demonstrate that jump to definition will work across packages as well, all of that sort of stuff. The other thing to talk about is that the implementation of all of this functionality is driven by a very, very lightweight evaluator for Q. And in this evaluator, I am exploring expressions, but we don't actually evaluate all of the expressions. We certainly evaluate parts, and we do a lightweight merging of structs where they get unified, but we don't evaluate all expressions, because that would turn it into a full evaluator. That could take a lot of time, and we need this to be really, really performant. But there are some really nice things that we can do. So, for example, let's say that we're creating some sort of schema. So this needs to be provided, and this needs to be provided. And so then let's say that we want a list of people. And so even within this, even though like we've just specified it using the ellipsis, we can get completion to work. So it understands here that this can only match into the ellipsis, and it's not doing a full evaluation, but it is sufficient for us to be able to do this sort of thing. And it will even cope with, to some extent, it will cope with list indices. So, for example, we could have a really weird header for this particular list. And sure enough, if we start specifying this 0th element, for example, it will do the completion correctly, and it will understand that forename. Okay, okay, that's just doing a text completion. Okay, that's not actually coming from the LSP. If we go to the forename one, we can see that that's got the different symbol. So that one's coming from the LSP. But yes, it knows enough to be able to hopefully do helpful things. But it is not a full evaluation. So one of the things that it doesn't evaluate is pattern matching. So if you're setting up schemas and you're using patterns in those schemas, it won't try and test against those. If you're doing binary expressions, just simple addition and things like that, whilst it will explore the left-hand side and the right-hand side of that expression, it won't try and do the addition, things like that. So it is limited. It is hopefully very useful. And we're certainly open to feedback on what more you need there in order to make it slightly more useful. So don't treat it as an oracle as to what evaluation will actually do when you finally get around to running your code. But hopefully it is very useful from the point of view of being able to write and get some basic completions going on. Yes, that's all I wanted to demonstrate.
Steve had a question, actually.
Yes, please.
Yes, Matthew. Thanks for your work on this. Going back to the demonstration you showed with jump to definition, I saw that your editor presented a set of choices. I've never seen that before, where in any language I've used with LSP, that definition's singular, right? But here you've introduced that it's a set.
That's right. Yes. Hang on. Let me just go back. So yeah, I think we were all actually pleasantly surprised that the LSP protocol allows for that. So yes, exactly. So yeah, if we jump definition from this B, it will show both of them. There are some really fun horror cases. So for example, this sort of thing, jump definition from one of these X's is like, oh well, actually we can prove that it has to unify with this X and with this X and with this X. These sorts of things are hopefully very useful. But yes, we were pleasantly surprised that the LSP protocol does support this. there is some suggestion that it might have been intended more for presenting alternatives. So if you have a scenario where, let's say, because of whatever language you're working in, its import system or its module system meant that it wasn't able to figure out like which version of a module or something like that was actually going to be available at runtime, it might present you a number of different options. Here we're using it more to say, we are confident, if we're presenting multiple options, we are confident that these are all things that you do have to, that are going to get unified together and you do have to keep in mind. Which actually leaves us with a problem when you do have ambiguous imports, but that's probably something we don't need to deal with for a long time. But yeah, it seems to work, and not only does the protocol support it, but all the editors that I've tested it in seem to be happy with it as well. Which, given that this is such a rare thing for a language, yeah, I was quite happy to discover.
Great. Interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
Huge thanks. I didn't see anything, but Shelter, please jump in if you have anything now. We're getting close to time, so I will slightly move us forward in any case. Huge thanks, Matthew. Hopefully everyone can still see the slides now. Look, right now, I'll sort of canter through the remaining ones. The VS Code plugin itself is now published to both the VS Code Marketplace and OpenVSX. Thanks for the prompt on that. We've sort of tightened up our publishing on that side of things. And as soon as there is a release of the VS Code extension, as of now, it will be published to both, or at least as of the beginning of next week. Moving quickly on to the docs and content side of things, we've actually seen a number of the updates here. Mainly the updates since last time, not mainly, the updates since last time were exclusively on the Q.dev side of things, which is where we've introduced a blog and a much clearer docs section, and we'll come to that in a second as well. The two blogs that Marcel has written so far are really sort of helping to sort of motivate why configuration is an incredibly important part of the landscape in which we work on a day-to-day basis now, but also a hint as well as to how Q is incredibly relevant and an important guardrail in the world of AI that we're all sort of finding ourselves in at the moment as well. And how adding structure to things actually builds confidence in the use of tools, whether they are AI tools or other tools, and includes improving our interaction with other, dare I say, human beings as well. So please take a look at those blogs. They're linked from this page here, but also they're clearly accessible from the Q.dev site itself. Roger alluded to this as well. We have other bits of content on there that is especially, around the CRDs that we have curated. Just to flag that those curated CRDs are really just convenience mechanisms for folks to avoid having to do Q-get CRD themselves. As in, much like any sort of registry, it should be easy to reach and grab the latest version of schema X or whatever it is Y, and that's why the registry exists. And so those curated modules exist to sort of bridge that gap between for the auto-publishing, for want of a better phrase, of these well-known things to get them into a registry where they aren't already in a registry. And the last guide that we added here, and it's linked from the AI blog post, is a demonstration of exactly how that structure of Q, that structured approach to things, can really improve the AI pipeline or workflow, whatever it wants to be, by introducing structure at a well-defined point here. If folks have other experience of where Q is just the adding of structure to things is actually improving the quality of life, please let us know. Really happy, whether it's in the AI space or otherwise. We're trying to provide examples here that are really just bringing Q to life for folks. Briefly on the community update side of things, and Dominic sends his apologies. He's not. He's away. He's away today. Please just get in touch if you want to add logo to the qlang.org site. Super happy to discuss any specific requirements that folks have as well around in the Q space, namespace, one of the Q user, but also all of our open source stuff is now hosted on namespace, so they're a supporter of Q as well, and that we're using them for their CI infrastructure, which has significantly improved our quality of life when it comes to time to getting code shipped by our CI pipelines being sped up. So thanks to them. I feel so bad. I'm glad that people have asked questions along the way. I feel very bad that Q&A has got 0 minutes left in order that we finish on time. But be very grateful if folks did have any questions and things they wanted us to follow up on. Thanks to those who've raised questions in the chat as well. We'll do so in Slack or on Discord, or just ping us a message as well, and we're happy to follow up. Thanks everybody for joining. Sorry to rattle through the last bit there, but I think the demo was like the icing on the cake there, on top of all the language updates that Marcel talked about and the huge amount of infrastructure that's gone into that. So thanks everyone for joining, and look forward to catching up next time.